This week on the 167, we're talking about knowing God, finding freedom, discovering your purpose, and making a difference. And we're hearing an extended testimony from Bree Daly. Welcome to the 167. Hey, welcome back to the 167. This is week 2 of I Love My Church. I am here with Senior Pastor Rick George.
Good morning, and I love my church.
I'm Discipleship Pastor Lucas Motley, and we are here to talk about loving our church, loving the lost.
Yeah, so great series. It's always a good reminder to kind of think back of the reasons or to the reasons that you attend the church that you attend and why people attend New Life. And there are probably people that are listening or watching this podcast that go to a different church, live in a different town, and that's fine. You just need to know, why do I love the church that I go to?
Mm-hmm. Well, and loving the church, we're going to talk a little bit about New Life and how that plays out. But the church it's global, it's local.
So you can love the church and then love your church specifically. But there are people who don't love either. They don't love the church or your church.
And you know who those people are because they are happy to tell you about it.
But that's not what we're here to talk about today.
But I think that is an interesting thing to point out, is people that don't like the church, they usually are very quick to tell you why. And I think that sometimes we're not as quick to say why we actually enjoy church. Like, why is that so important for us to come together and to be together? Because, there's always that thing of, I remember I watched a video recently on Instagram that it was people having a debate, and this person was like, he's like, well, I'm assuming you're not a Christian, because they had already started to debate some topics. And the person goes, no, I am a Christian. And he's like, do you believe the Bible? And they go, no. And he's like, then you're not a Christian. But they were really insistent. And so I think church is one of those areas where it's like, I think you can be a Christian and not necessarily love the church, but I think that's really, really hard.
It's not a healthy thing.
Yeah. So I wanted to start by this week we started kind of talking through our know God, find freedom, discover your purpose, and make a difference. Yep. And knowing God, I wrote down, it includes the introduction. So when we're passionate about people knowing God, there's a discipleship aspect to that, as well as to continue to know God, to get to know him better. But obviously, to know someone, you have to receive the initial introduction.
Yeah.
Right?
So it's the age-old debate of the chicken or the egg, which comes first. And I've had conversations with people over the years that say, "Oh no, it's all about discipleship. We got to get people, kind of connected, loving God and growing in their faith." And yes, that is super important, but that happens after someone knows God. You can't grow in your relationship with God if you don't have a relationship with God. And so it's not that one is necessarily like this is way more important than the other. In some ways, it's love God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength. And a second one is equally as important: love your neighbor as yourself.
Right.
It's kind of on that level of, we have to help people know God. It's about evangelism. It's about telling people who Jesus is and what Jesus did for them, and make disciples, like encourage them in that journey. So in my mind, it begins with, we have to help people know God, that he is real, that he loves them, has a plan for their life, and that they can have all of their past sins and mistakes, all their hurts, habits, and hang-ups can be taken care of through the blood of Jesus. And a lot of people just don't know that.
Right. And I think what you're touching on, people don't know that. And knowing the character of God, I think, helps you know that. A lot of people are asking, well, how should I live? How do I get that salvation? And it's like, I feel like the more that you know God's character, the more that you will discover that. But you talked also that we're a church that we do some things that are very intentional in order to reach the lost. And so I just thought we could highlight some of those things right now and say, like, what are some of your favorite things that we do? Or maybe some of the things that people, it's kind of like, when it's the water that you swim in, you don't really notice that we're doing this, but it's something that we're very intentional about. And what are some of the fruits that we've seen from that to appeal to the lost?
Yeah. So the way we design our church services, okay, very intentional about keeping the lost, the people who aren't here, keeping them in mind. So the music selection, even the kind of the volume of the music, and sometimes people say, man, it was kind of loud. Well, it's kind of loud on purpose. One, just to kind of be a little different, but two, when a new person comes in and it's quiet and you can hear
Your own
people
voice singing.
singing, you can hear yourself breathing, and it's just awkward. And so we fill the room with that volume. And the Bible tells us, to make a joyful shout, a noise, that when you go back into the Old Testament and they were worshiping in the temple, sometimes they would shout and sing and worship so loud it could be heard, from miles away. So we just want to be biblical in that regard.
I swear, growing up, I always had this thing about, like every time that we would sing, like I grew up with a lot of hymns, which I think there's great hymns. But what I didn't like was like you said, where it's like a little piano in the corner, so you feel like you're the loudest person in the room, and so everybody sings like, and then or it's like, hey, let's all read this out loud together. We're like, Luke 2, here we go. In those days, yeah. And you're just like, what is going on? Like, why can't we read it like in those days, Caesar? You want to, you want to be excited. You want to give people opportunity to get a little loud and to relax.
And so this is in no way, and from my heart, I mean this. It is in no way a slam or disrespect to other churches who have different styles of worship. So, but for us here at New Life, we feel like because we have a passion and a call to reach the lost, that we want to provide a worship experience that they can come into and feel comfortable. And you and I, every pastor on staff, anyone that's in leadership has heard the story over and over and over again that, man, when I came in, this was not what I remembered church being like.
Right.
Most people have some idea of what church was when they were a kid, or some reason that they don't go to church. And then they come in here and they're like, this was not what I was expecting. Like and that's a good thing for us. It's like, that's what we want to break down, some of those barriers that keep people away from the church or keep them away from hearing God speak to them. And so we want to create an environment that says, this is different.
Yeah. I think one of my favorite things that we do that kind of appeals to that is I feel like we have intentional programming as to, we expect to bring in people with problems, but we give them practical ways to kind of get through that and walk with them through that. So something as simple as, people always ask us all the time, like, why do you have a security team? And I'm like, because we want to invite people in that, like you said, maybe they're struggling that morning, maybe they're hungover, maybe they're in the middle of a custody battle, like that they are messy people. And yet we are providing this security perimeter of going, hey, listen, we want you here. Now, you can't, break into the children's ministry. You can't,
Yeah, we love you. We want you here, but we understand that you're a little bit on edge. And
and we want to keep everybody safe. And so it's like kind of telling our own people, it's okay to bring your friend, because don't worry, we're going to create good fences. But we also have, like programs like Life Group, like I'm of course passionate about that. Programs like Life Group, Freedom, Divorce Care, things like that, where it's like, oh, you were in a messy situation. And it's not like, oh, you're in a messy situation, you need to go get that cleaned up somewhere else. And then we will teach you the Bible. It's like, no, we will dive into, your life where you are at, no matter what that mess is.
Yeah, and that's right. And we also provide things throughout the year that are intended to touch the heart and the minds, to captivate people who aren't here yet. Like, we do Kids Fest, where it's just a fun day where people can come, have some exposure to the church and to church people, and they get to look around and say, oh, this isn't exactly what I thought it was going to be either.
It's a coffee date. Yeah,
and we've had people say, do we have a donation somewhere? We're like, nope, this Kids Fest is free. You don't have to pay for anything. And they're like, wow, what's the catch?
Right.
Like, and there's really no catch other than, like, yes, there's a catch. We want you to see God. We want you to experience God in a different way. We do, again, various activities, like we have Bike Week. Like, the intention of Bike Week is to appeal to a group of people, a subset of our culture that is unique yet very valuable. And we're going to do a week that allows people to bring friends to church that might not otherwise ever come to church.
Yeah.
So that's one of the things we do.
Well, and I'll just brag on Pastor Nick for a second. Pastor Nick is incredible because we have, we experience a lot of the feedback in the discipleship ministry, and we get tons of feedback from parents that Pastor Nick is very passionate about providing spaces that kids can come and worship God, to the point where we are I think there may be a couple of other churches, but usually not to the extent that we do it, that we cater to kids on the spectrum.
Yep.
And so, we have people that are paras essentially inside the Kids World Ministry. We, have the buddy system going on. And Pastor Nick does a really good job of trying to accommodate people with sensory issues and things like that, because we've literally had families come to our church and said we were kicked out of our other church essentially because they said, well, they can't come back until you have this figured out. And they're like, what do you mean have it figured out? Like they have autism. And so, Pastor Nick is very, very passionate about that, to that extent where we're making accommodations and, reaching out to people who could not go to church otherwise.
Yeah. So, again, we aren't perfect. We haven't figured it all out. We're still, working on it. But we want to demonstrate in a very tangible way that not only do we love God, but we love you. No matter where you are, what you're struggling with, we love you. And we're going to demonstrate that in some tangible ways by offering some environments and some activities and experiences that will invite you in just as you are.
Yeah.
Right. So you can know God. Then we'll get to the part where, we'll help you find freedom and discover your purpose so you can make a difference and go through this process of life change. And this coming week, I'm going to talk a little bit about a couple of words that you hear often here at New Life. And those two words, you're going to have to come on Sunday to figure out what those two words are. I'm not going to tell you on this podcast.
Spoiler alert.
I know. So, but there are two very powerful words that we're passionate about, but it happens after you know God. Right? And so,
is it
check
Fast
it out.
and Furious?
Those are good words, but no.
Star Wars.
No.
All right.
Family Feud? No.
I was going to say Wheel of Fortune, but that's 3 words.
I'm bad at math.
Ah,
Wheel of Fortune.
the mathing.
No.
Yeah, and I think that, like I said, we've seen the fruit of that in the sense that we have a very diverse congregation. We have people that are from all walks of life. We've had a growing international community, bilingual community. We have people who are, been Christ followers since they were, able to walk. And we have people who are brand new Christ followers, atheists, addicts, like the whole gamut.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, and we welcome those. And again, sometimes you get a bad rap and think, oh, you're not preaching, the word of God, or you're just trying to, cater to everybody. And I think if you get plugged in and the heart of New Life Community Church, it will be very obvious that, yes, we love you like you are, but we're not going to let you stay where you are. Like, we're going to push you to life change, to become more like Jesus in every part of your life.
Yeah. Well, and this week you were talking about Galatians 5, and we moved on to talk about find freedom. In Galatians 5, it says, verse 13 and 14, "For you have been called to live in freedom, my brothers and sisters. But don't use your freedom to satisfy your sinful nature. Instead, use your freedom to serve one another in love. For the whole law can be summed up in in this command: love your neighbor as yourself." So, and then Galatians 5:1, it says, "So Christ has truly set us free. Now make sure that you stay free and don't get tied up in slavery to the law." So there's that kind of, you can see that spectrum in there of not being tied up by legalism and the law, but yet a call to righteousness. And then you have this other thing where you're just bound in sin. And so it's like almost like you can be bound into religion and you can be bound into sin. So how do we stay in the middle, and why is this so important not to go either direction?
The simple answer there, in my mind, is there is a propensity that every one of us has towards sin. Okay, and the easy thing is to fall back into the bondage of sin. That's what I believe Galatians is addressing. That it's one thing to have someone introduce God to you, to introduce Jesus Christ and the sacrifice that he made on the cross, and you recognize that and say, that's great, I want that. The tendency then is to say, now I'm saved, I've got my get out of hell free card.
Right.
Like, so now it's fire insurance, right? So I've got it. Now I can just go and do whatever I want because I'm going to go to heaven.
Right.
That's not what he's saying.
The more I sin, the more grace increases.
Yeah. And so I think this is, in a very practical way, addressing that tension of, yes, you can know God, you can be saved and set free, and then you have the rest of your life to live, and the tendency, the pull, the attack that's coming against you is going to be to pull you back into that bondage of sin. And it's going to be really easy for you to say, well, I'm saved. I know God. I'm a better person than I was before. And so I can kind of slip back and dabble a little bit in some of those things of my past. And before long, you're back into the bondage of sin. And so this letter to the Galatians from Paul says, don't do that. Like, it's going to lead you to a place that you don't want to be. That is not why Christ died on the cross. So you could know him and then go right back to doing what you were doing before. That's not the point.
Right. And I think that you see that pendulum swing where, you'll see somebody come out of something, like, oh, I had an addiction, and you'll see them come out of their addiction. And then there's either two reactions really, which is, oh my gosh, I have to help my friend who is also in addiction come out of that addiction. Or, well, I don't know why they're still in their addiction. I got, like, if I can do it, then this is, I did it and it was so super easy. And so you should be able to do it. And so it almost moves into pride and religiousness and stuff like that, and self-righteousness. And rather than going, it is by the grace of God that I have, come out of this. And I remember talking, I think I've told this story before, but I was literally walking down the hall with Mike Ward, and he was talking to somebody else, and they said, oh, I've been a Christian my whole life. And he goes, that's Lucas's testimony, like, just stayed on the straight and narrow. And I laughed, and I was like, I said, this probably wasn't my best moment, but I just laughed. And he goes, why? I said, that's not my testimony. And I said, and anybody who says that's their testimony, they're either lying to you or they don't understand what Christ has done for them. And I said, because either they're hiding some sin, which was my story. I was like, oh, I'm the perfect kid, but I was hiding. And then there's even if you are perfect in every way, like, it doesn't matter. You've sinned and you're going to hell, and it's only by the blood of Christ that you are redeemed. And it's like, that has to be people's testimony. And so you see Paul kind of exhort them to both things, to stay in that middle lane of, hey, listen, you're not, because you get some of those, pastors or sermons where it's like, we're all just dirty. We're dirty sinners and we'll always be dirty. And it's like, no. You're redeemed. You're the righteousness of Christ, but you are the righteousness of Christ. You are not the righteousness of Lucas. It's like, I think that's such a hard balance to stay into, to what he describes as keeping your freedom.
Yeah. And so, it's that tension, and Paul addresses it in a variety of ways in his writings to different churches, but, it's that mindset or that idea that he communicates that we're in a war, like, life is challenging in itself. And then when you think about the spiritual attack and that pull of the enemy to get you back onto his side, and the recognition that Christ died to set you free, stay free. Don't willingly walk back into prison.
Right.
Stay out of that. But we forget what it was like to be in bondage. And there was a reason why we wanted the freedom that comes through Christ. And then we experience it, and then we start living,
Then
and we're
things
like,
get good for a little while.
and you're like, oh, well, I kind of miss prison life. I
Yeah.
kind of miss the that cold dungeon. Like, let's go back and try that a little bit. And
I
you're
got
like,
in really good shape in the yard, so if I want to get in shape, I got to
yeah,
go back to prison.
yeah. And then you're like, oh man, now I know why I didn't want to be there. And so
Yeah.
you start the process, and he's like, don't do that. Like, I'll save you a bunch of trouble. Don't do that.
So we moved on after that from finding freedom to discovering your purpose. And so I just kind of want to ask, like, if we're exhorting people to do that, to find your fit, what God has called you to, why is that so pivotal for Christians to do? Like, can't I just get saved and just be a really nice person? Why is finding our purpose such an important thing?
So yes, you can. Like, you can get saved and just go through life and wait for heaven, but you miss out on a lot of what God has for you. And that passage in Romans 8:28 that says, we know that God causes all things to work together for the good of those who love God and are called according to his purpose for them.
Right.
And so God has a purpose for you, for me, for every person listening to this podcast, for every person alive. God has a purpose. Some people lean into that and try to discover, like, what does God really want from me? And even further, what does God want from me today? What's his purpose for me today? Is my purpose to just get up, go to work, do a job, come home, go to bed? Is that my purpose? Or does God have something more intentional for me? Does God have something on a grander scale that I get to be a part of?
Right.
And if you don't discover that, oftentimes, life becomes meaningless or kind of ritualistic. And then you start hearing people say things like, well, yes, I'm saved, and one day I'll get to spend eternity with Jesus. And then that in-between time is, well, nothing.
Right.
And yes, heaven is a great thing, and salvation is a great thing. But ministry in the middle is really good too. And it's important because God has chosen to use us as a tool in this world to change lives.
Well, and I love that you brought this up earlier, and I think that's an interesting thing to explore is a lot of people, like when we talk about health and wealth preachers and things like that, it's like, oh, you got saved? God's just going to pour money into your pockets. And very clearly in the New Testament, there's a lot of things that say, like, he's our Father and he likes to give us good gifts. Like, that's just what it is. But there's this correlation, and you've touched on this before, of that where it's like, if it's according to his purpose, those who are dedicated according to his purpose. I even had a really strange conversation with somebody recently where it's like that last part in Mark where it's like, hey, you're going to get sent out and people are going to get bitten by snakes and like not die, like venomous snakes. And like, people have taken that, and now you have these snake handling churches, which is super weird. It's really weird. But you have a case in the New Testament where Paul, on a missionary journey, is bitten, like he has the shipwreck or whatever, and he's bitten by a venomous snake, and he shakes off the fire and he doesn't die. And it's like, okay, well, that is literally the fulfillment of this prophecy. It happened. But that's because I truly believe that if God says, hey, you need to go here and do this thing for me. Like if God, came to me in a dream and he said, I need you to go to this village in Africa and tell them about Christ. If on the way to the village in Africa, my plane started to crash, I would be like, oh, I'm going to survive this because God has called me to this purpose, and he's not going to put me on a plane to Africa and then kill me.
Right. Yep.
That's not what's going to happen. And so like, there's that kind of where people, I think a lot of times are looking for God's blessing in what they are doing. It's like, well, I'm going to go do this and I'm going to go do this, and I'm not going to consult God. It has nothing to do with his purpose. And I'm expecting God's blessing, versus when you're looking at that going, no, God's going to cause everything to be good when it's according to something that he's called you to.
Yeah. Trying to figure out the purpose of God and the blessing of God and our understanding of what it means to be blessed. And it gets real confusing and cloudy, and we have to mix in, what cultural expectations are of, being blessed. And it gets like, to have that conversation, is really hard. And I say that because one of my friends in ministry We have supported him for the 23 years that we have existed as a church, has a small ministry in the inner city of Kansas City, Missouri. The name of the ministry is Full Faith City Church. They minister to the poorest of the poor. One of his heart passions in life is ministering to bridge people.
Yeah.
The homeless communities that live under bridges in Kansas City, Missouri. And they would go out and minister to them, take them food, pray with them, tell them about Jesus. And there's no money in that.
Right.
Like, I don't know if you knew that or not, but there,
I can't invest in that on the stock market.
And so there's not a lot of money in that. And so as a church, New Life Community Church supported that ministry with monthly contributions, and we have for 23 years, and there's been some fruit from that. But last week, Pastor David Hopkins, died suddenly in his sleep, had a heart attack, and died. Devastating, right? And so some people might think, well, what was the purpose of that? I don't know. But I know that David had a purpose for being in Kansas City, Missouri, and he was a faithful servant to those who other people had abandoned. Right. And it was a very fruitful ministry until the day he died. And now, he's gone.
With Jesus.
And so his purpose was very different than my purpose, and very different than your purpose, and very different than the purpose that God has for those that are listening or watching this podcast. But David embraced God's purpose for his life, and it was not a life of prosperity and financial blessing and all kinds of good things in this world. Like, he lived very with meager income. Yeah, I mean, it was, but he fulfilled his purpose. And so don't feel like, oh, I got to discover God's purpose for me because it's going to lead me to a place of
health and wealth and prosperity,
an abundance of finances, because that might not be the case.
Yeah.
There are missionaries that live in poverty in another country, fulfilling God's purpose for them. That's not what God has called me to. Right? That's not my purpose, but my purpose is not more valuable than their purpose, nor is theirs more valuable than mine. It's just different.
Absolutely. But I think that we can assure people and tell people, if God's calling you to it, he's going to help you.
Yeah.
Like, he's going to help make the way in that.
But we just have to discover what that purpose is for me and then step into it.
Right.
So that we can make a difference.
Exactly. So, like 1 minute left. Tell us a little bit about your challenge this week. And
yeah, so for the rest of this week, I'm inviting you to pray. And we're going to do prayer walks at the new church property.
Tuesday, Wednesday,
Thursday, 6 p.m. It'll probably be 45 minutes of walking and praying or so. And then we're asking people to fast something. One meal, one day, one food group, one thing, social media. Just try fasting at some level, giving up something for the purpose of prayer and focus on God.
Excellent. All right. Well, we challenge you to do that. This week, we actually saw a testimony from Bree Daly, who's a member of our congregation. And if you stay tuned for the rest of the 167, you're actually going to hear an extended interview here on the podcast. So
awesome.
We'll see you guys next time.
Hey, welcome back to the 167 podcast. In this series, I Love My Church, we're going to be talking to some different people from New Life and getting their I Love My Church stories. So today I am here with my friend Bree Daly. Hi, Bree.
Hey.
Hey, thanks for coming on. Would you just tell everybody real quick, how long have you been going to New Life and how did you find New Life?
Yeah, for sure. Been coming to New Life since January, February, and actually I started walking with a friend a block away.
That's cool.
And she mentioned her life group.
Okay.
Like over time, it was probably like a month into walking with her, and she mentioned her life group.
Cool.
And so we joined the life group before going to New Life.
Awesome. That's very cool.
Yeah.
So that's January, February of this year, of 2023.
New.
So cool. And we are in September now. So It's been a couple of months.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, awesome. And so if I asked you to finish the sentence, I love my church because, what would you say?
The compassion of people,
Awesome.
or the people in general.
Just the people in general.
Yeah, for sure.
Cool. All right. Well, we're going to talk a little bit more about those two things. So, when you think about just, like I said, the last 9 months, how has attending New Life, becoming part of New Life, how has that impacted your life, your relationships with people, with God? Like, what does that look like for you?
I think the biggest thing has been confidence for me.
Yeah.
And I think over the last 9 months, my confidence has grown with people and with trust in God,
Cool.
and growth with God.
Yeah.
I already had like a real good connection with God, but then coming to church, this is my first time being like committed to church.
Okay,
And my
cool.
family
Yeah.
being committed to
Yeah.
church. So for us, it's been a good experience for us to connect as a family. And then for me to dig even deeper in my spiritual journey.
Awesome. So you mentioned your family. So you are married. Your husband is, say,
Kobe,
and your son is?
Theo.
Okay. Just want to make sure we get those right.
Uh-huh.
So you guys have been attending as a family this year. And prior to, being here, what was your church experience?
Very little. Very little. I didn't go to church growing up.
Okay.
My husband did.
Okay.
And then we tried out a church before. We went for maybe a month or two.
Yeah.
We tried out New Life one time before. Then we were like, not the right time for us.
Okay.
Not ready.
That happens.
And now.
And now you're here.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So what keeps you coming back?
Worship.
That's a good answer.
Worship. Community.
Okay.
I think that's like a big hole, is like I had that connection with God and I was
Sure.
working on that growth. And I have support and stuff, but community in church has been a big one for us as a family.
What is
So-
it? Well, yeah. What does that look like for you guys when you say community in church? What does that? What does that mean? How does that play out practically?
So life group for sure,
Okay, cool.
because
Yeah.
that's what we got into before even going to church. And then I think there's some accountability in going to church every Sunday.
Definitely.
So kind of keeping each other accountable on that. Some mornings I wake up, some mornings he wakes up. We're like, oh, I don't really want to go, you know? So
Yeah.
keeping each other accountable. And I think it's really important to raise kids around, not everyone in church is going to be the same, or have the same mindset, but
Right.
raising kids that have the similar mindset as other people, where you're growing with Christ.
Sure. Cool. That's awesome.
Yeah.
How has that sort of, like, in what ways do you think that has changed any of your dynamics, like your home dynamic, your relationship with friends, your connections with people? Is there anything that you feel like, man, like really coming to church and being a part of this community has impacted some other things for you?
Well, I would go back to the confidence,
Okay.
because I was like really 9 months ago, I was really lacking confidence. I had just had Theo and I had this relationship, but I still had roadblocks that were keeping me from like confidence and boldness.
Okay.
And now having that, after working through some stuff, that allows me to show up how God would have me show up.
Cool.
And that gives me more opportunities to share my experience with others.
That's awesome. Do you feel like that's something that you are able to do more easily?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, especially, little plug, like especially with freedom.
Yeah, cool.
sure.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Nice. I love hearing that. So our church mission, right, our statement is love God, love people. First of all, like, what does that mean to you? What do you think that means?
I think it can mean a lot.
Well, sure, but like for you, like when you
Yeah.
hear love God, love people, like what is that? How does that hit for you?
I think I have to do one to be able to do the other.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
I have to have a connection with God to be able to be who God would have me be to other people. And I have to have community and support with other people. I have to be in unity with other people to fulfill what God's purpose would be for me.
Yeah. That's
I think
cool.
they're intertwined.
Yeah, for sure. That's a great answer.
Mm-hmm.
And I love that those are coming together for you. Very
Yeah.
cool. So, yeah, how do you feel like you do that in your everyday life? Love God and love people.
Oh, I'm a huge people person. I'm a huge people person. I'm constantly around people. And I hate to like circle back around, but same with the confidence of like, that has made such a big difference for me to get some of the past stuff out of the way, to
Sure.
be able to show up for my family, show
Yeah.
up for other people, put myself in a position to be of purpose.
That's cool. I love that. That's great. What else? I mean, is there anything else that you just want to share about like your journey here at New Life over the last 9 months?
I think the biggest thing that I'm really grateful for is that I was in a place where I was open and willing to join church,
Yeah.
to get invested, and to try new things out, try life groups out, try freedom out, try a prayer session out.
Yeah.
Because I know in past situations I've not always been open to that. So I think God led me here at the right timing.
Sure.
And I'm really grateful for that.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
And I mean, so exciting to see what's still going to come, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
totally.
Like if
Totally.
it's been this good in the first year, right?
God has been super amazing in my life. I
Yeah.
come from a family that, didn't go to church. They had religious beliefs, but they didn't go to church. And they had, a lot of difficulties. And so to go from that to sitting here with a really healthy, healthy family, I have connections with my parents again, and I'm living free and happy. Like, that's amazing.
That is amazing. I love it. Well,
Yeah.
thanks so much
Yeah,
for
of course.
sharing
Thanks for
that
having
with us.
me.
That was so awesome. I love hearing people's stories. So thanks for being here. And we're going to do more I Love My Church stories through the rest of the series. So we hope that you will come back and stay tuned for that.
If you enjoyed this episode of the 167, make sure you like, subscribe, follow, get notified, leave a 5-star rating and a positive review. Tell all your friends to listen as well. Make sure you go over to newlifegardener.com and check out all that we have to offer as a church, and check out our messages online as well. Thanks for listening.